In today's episode, we go over exactly how to paint that fender that you just messed up on your wife's car trying to drift it around a corner using only spray paint that we find on the internet. Let's get to it. So this job is actually not that complicated. So first things first is we've got to have some sort of clean room. It's very important that we do not get any kind of dirt or debris into the paint itself. So a makeshift paint booth, I guess you could say, is a good option. And we're just using some painter's protective flooring stuff that we found at Home Depot. It was like $5, so we're gonna make a makeshift paint booth. It's pretty easy. Just duct tape some stuff together, hang it, and yeah, you're pretty much good to go after that. Now, once you have your makeshift paint booth all set up and ready to go, it should look something like this. A few holes for ventilation, but it can breathe, but there's no major dirt that's gonna get in. It should be pretty easy. Now, getting a fender can be sort of tricky. Most people are going to tell you to go to a wrecker and get a bent, dented, or whatever kind of messed up fender, but I find it a lot easier, quicker, cheaper, and faster to just go directly to the manufacturer and get a brand new fender. It's going to be a little more expensive than going to say, a junkyard and finding one, but you're going to save a lot of time and a lot of headache by just buying a new one. Having one that's already got scratches and dents means you're going to have to bog it, sand it, fill it way more than what we're going to do now. So, in my advice, just go get a new one. But if you're up for a good adventure, you can go find a good dented one if there is such a thing and go that way. But my suggestion is to just find a new or go buy a new OEM one from the manufacturer. You need to prop up your fender some sort of way. You can prop it up any way you wish, as long as it's not on the ground and you have complete access to all the nooks and crannies of the fender itself. So find something to either prop it on or hang it from a string like we will do later, and let's get to work.
Taking the seal off.
Now, if you're like me and you've been searching the internet for days on end, you've probably come to realize that painting can be difficult, but it doesn't have to be. Prep is everything when it comes to painting. If you do not take your time prepping the fender right, it's going to turn out crappy no matter how good your base coat and clear coat is. So make sure to take your time and let's prep the vehicle right. Now, this will take a little bit of time, but we need to scuff up the fender. And what this does is it makes the fender a little bit rough. That way the primer has a surface to stick to. Now, if you're painting your fender on a particularly cold day like what we are, you need to heat up your paint. This just helps the paint flow out of the can a little bit more evenly and makes your paint job that much easier to do in the long run. And you need to make sure that your paint is properly mixed. If the chemicals inside that spray can aren't mixed up, you're in for a really bad time. Now make sure you have a mask on before you start painting. And now let's do a first light coat of primer. It's really important to spray this coat on extremely light, just a little bit of flake on top of the fender. That way it dries, it adheres to the fender, and then the next coat on top of that will have even more surface to bite onto and adhere to. Now, depending on the size of your fender, this may take 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats, 4 coats, 5 coats. Don't do 1 coat, that's probably not a good idea, but probably 3 or 4 coats minimum to get full coverage. And like I said, if it is a particularly cold day wherever you live and wherever you're painting at, using a heat gun in between coats to just kind of flash harden the paint is always a good idea. Now, once you've put on all your primer coats, it's time to get sanding. We need to get this surface as smooth as humanly possible. So starting with 1000 grit sandpaper, do a light sand over it, get it nice and smooth as best as you can. Then we'll step up gradually, going from a 1,000 grit to 1,500, all the way up to 2,000 grit. Take your time. Like I said, preparation is key. Just go over it, sand it, wax and grease remover, get all the dust out. And then once you're done, make sure you go over it with a tack cloth. And what this does, it gets all the little flakes and dust and all that other crap after you've done the wax and grease remover. Just make sure it's absolutely clean. Now let's get to base coat. Just like the primer, we need to heat up our spray cans, get the paint nice and warm, and then we need to give it a good shake and light coats. The key is to just build the base coat up slowly. 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats, 4 coats. Put 3 or 4 coats on lightly, and then your last coat needs to be pretty heavy. Not heavy enough to run, but heavy enough to where it's got good solid coverage. Do make sure that you get all the little nooks and crannies on the side, that way you've got complete coverage of the entire fender. Like all the insides need to be covered, and all the little bolt covers, they all need to be covered. The back side of the fender that you do not see is not that big a deal, but any part that you could see at any moment in time does need to be painted. Now it's really important to let our base coat dry overnight. Now, I know, we want to do it now, but we need to let our base coat completely dry overnight. That way, the next day, we're ready for our clear coat. Now that the base coat has had time to dry, it's time to do our clear coat. Now just like before, we need to make sure this fender is extremely clean. So get your wax and grease remover, give it a good wipe down, and then grab your tack cloth and make sure we get all the little dust off of the fender. And now, just like before, we need to do even coats of clear coat. Now, it's extremely important to wear a respirator. I cannot stress this enough. This stuff is extremely toxic, and if it gets in your lungs, you are going to have a serious bad time. It's not recommended to do this anywhere else other than a controlled environment and with a respirator, guys. You have been warned. But if we do this step right, our paint job's going to look extremely good. And now after a few clear coats, give it a little bit of time to dry, and then you can set it out in the sun to harden. And it should look something like this. Now take whatever kind of buffing compound you want. I would suggest some type of cutting compound. And let's get to buffing. Now, we're not going to go into too much detail on how to buff this thing, but this is where the shine really comes to life. Now, I'm no expert on buffing cars and all that fun stuff, but take your time, go watch some other YouTube videos on how to properly buff your car, and just take your time, buff it, polish it, buff it, shine it, all that fun stuff, and you should get a wicked, awesome result. Thank you guys for watching this video, and if you liked it, please be sure to give it a good thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more cool videos like this. So, catch you in the next one.